Well, welcome to the Center for Architecture and its 3 new exhibits that opened last night. So please take a look either after the program or come back for it. I'm Stephen Johnson. I'm co-chair of AIANY New York's Architectural Dialogue Committee on behalf of my co-chair Abby Suckle and our committee, William Singer and Dale Cohen. We're delighted to have you here for the spring edition of Cocktails and Conversation. Tonight, we are so pleased to have Sakong of FXCollaborative join us to consider how New York's existing buildings can be reimagined to meet today's societal and climate imperatives in a program he calls Historical Reinvention. Austin is design director of FXCollaborative's Cultural and Educational Studio. Educated at the Cooper Union and Columbia University, he teaches at Columbia and NYU and serves on the Jersey City Historic Preservation Commission. Over the past year or so, you may have noticed a wide range of very curious articles in the Times about design topics, ranging from the state of the Chrysler Building to brutalism, Westbeth to access at Columbia, and Barbie to Mark Zuckerberg, all of which prompted me to think, well, that's interesting, and then look up and see that the byline is Anna Kodé. And Anna, a feature writer for the Times, joins us tonight as well. Educated at Cornell, she is the adjunct professor at NYU's Journalism Institute and the author of her forthcoming book, Unseen Places, on the art and power of observing. So welcome to you both. Before we begin, a few program notes. We'll be back in the fall with a robust schedule of conversations to kick off our 14th year of this program. And over the upcoming long July 4th weekend, we at the committee are participating in a 5-day series of events that continue the celebration of New York's 400th birthday, as well as kicking off America's 250. The final day, July 7th, will be a program that we're doing in collaboration with the Global Dialogues and Planning Urban Design Committees of AI in New York that involves open houses at a variety of design firms in Lower Manhattan that afternoon, and then a program here at the center focusing on New York as a global city facing the future. So if you're not at the beach, please join us. And of course, our program was never complete without a specialty cocktail in honor of our guests. And it's wonderful to welcome back Toby Cecchini of the Long Island Bar in Brooklyn and his co-conspirator behind the bar, David Moo. So Toby and David, what are you mixing for us tonight?
Thank you. Welcome to Cocktails and Conversation. Is my mic on, in fact? Can you hear me back? Thank you. I am Toby Cecchini. This is David Moo. We are the, for those of you who have never been to one of these, we are the perennial kind of absurd co-conspirator bartenders who are tasked with making a cocktail to reflect the sort of trajectory of work / outlook of whatever
biography / drinking taste.
Yeah, / taste also of the architect currently on the chopping block. It is a ridiculous thing, but we've taken to it like deer to water. So sometimes more successful than other times, and sometimes based more on architecture, and sometimes more on theory, and sometimes more on taste. In the case of, we don't like to give away too much about the architecture. That's coming later. So we try to keep our thing bounded within the cocktail. So after talking at length to Sakong, what we took away was a very few things. Firstly, that I was actually sort of thinking, this is a guy after my own heart, because we started talking about cocktails, and he was like, to be honest, I don't mean to offend anybody whose life work is this, but I mean, I don't really like cocktails, to be honest. I find them, he said he found them both too simple and too sweet.
Yes, that was actually really interesting.
And I thought that was kind of amazing, because I thought, as somebody who has made cocktails my entire adult life and who bases my living on it, I also hate cocktails. So I have that in common with you, although I find them typically too sweet and too complicated. I find that people try to do too much within the bounds of a cocktail and try to be too chefy and try to like jimmy too many things into it, and it ends up being abjectly horrible for the most part.
Also, each of those little ingredients that people add into these kitchen sink cocktails are themselves bringing sugar to the party, and therefore, for that reason alone, they often become too sweet.
Typically, yeah, typically true. So, like, sort of in terms of his sort of objective view of like what he does at the FX Collaborative and his viewpoint in architecture, I was like, okay, I don't want to get too much into that because he's going to get into that. But I took away one word. He was like, if I stand for anything, sort of my critic, as it were, is renewal. Like I sort of stand for renewal, like renewing things, like that's what we do in sort of a nonprofit way and this and that. Like I think my whole ethos is renewal. And we were like, well, that's worthless. What are we gonna do with that? And so actually, we took away that he's like working on, what's the name of the armory? The Kingsbridge, this enormous Kingsbridge Armory project, about which I actually knew because it's such a huge thing, you sort of can't not know about it. We were like, oh, this is great. There's a whole sort of history of Marshall cocktails and alternately college cocktails. Like certainly all the Ivy League schools have their own cocktail. There's a Harvard cocktail, there's a Yale cocktail, there's a Columbia cocktail.
Only one of these cocktails is actually good. The rest of them are universally shitty. Wait, which one?
I disagree. I think none of them are good, actually. So
the Harvard is actually pretty good.
We started looking into all the Marshall cocktails, like the Marine Corps cocktail and the Naval cocktail. We're like, this is really a blind alley. Like, these are horrible drinks. Like, really, just like, and I was like, but we can renew them and make them cool. And then we started working on them.
One of them was good. It's just totally not to the point. One of them was that, remember, it was like that Bacardi cocktail that made with some other syrup.
Orange juice. That's enough said. No orange juice allowed. So we were like, but looking at his own personal taste, he's like, really, I'm really into just whiskey and bitters. Like I like things bitter and dry. Like have you guys ever heard of bitters or Amaro? Which is great. It's like us saying like, have you guys ever heard of like extruded aluminum and glass for buildings? Like it's something you should look into because I think it's amazing. So in point of fact, we had heard of those and we were like, okay, so, he's really into like, it sounds like he has much more of a sort of winterized palate. Like those are what we call brown and stirred drinks, like wintry drinks made with whiskey or darker spirits and just sort of like nudged here and there with aspects of Amaro or bittering agents or what we call fortified wines. That's a pretty known class of drinks and it's more or less kind of a winter thing. And we're like,
he specifically mentioned that he drinks a Negroni or that he sometimes drinks a Boulevardier, which is a kind of whiskey Negroni essentially. And then when we asked him what else he drinks, he essentially said, well, I often just order whiskey. And so we definitely moved things in the whiskey direction, based on that. Sorry, go on.
And actually, we were sort of impressed that he was like, I drink a Boulevardier. We were like, whoa. That's like us saying, like, sometimes for the exterior of buildings, we start thinking about going back to terracotta. You know what I'm saying? Like, a little bit out there, Were you impressed? And so I was like, there we go, look at that, a Boulevardier. And so we started like knocking that around sort of jokingly at first, but it was like, actually, that's kind of an interesting, like, think about this, like, we're entering spring now, so like a Boulevardier, no. That's like a very sort of winterized drink. But what if we, took this concept of renewal, what if we did something new with a Boulevardier to sort of lighten it up and make it spring-like? And so of course, all the cool kids nowadays are clarifying everything. So you could clarify the juices and you put things in tumblers and spinners and you make them clear. And we're like, what if we made an all-white Boulevardier? And so we started doing that and we're like, oh, this is bollocks. What are we doing? Like, you can actually just take the elements of a Boulevardier and lighten them up by making them into a highball.
The first thing we did is we just made a Boulevardier and then lengthened it with soda water to see whether that would work. It did not.
That's true.
But
It didn't work super well. It was like, we were like, it turned into this. We were like, okay.
Yeah.
That's never okay. Like if it's kind of like, you could get through that. You could drink that. That's not good enough. It's like it has to pop. Like we're always like, that's not popping really. So we started messing around with the concept of whiskey with different bitters and we took a couple that we very much like. One of them being the perennial Chinar, which is a very low alcohol, what would you even call it?
Amaro.
Yeah, in a sense. I guess it's an Amaro. I mean, it's not terribly bitter. It's made out of artichoke. And it's very, very quintessentially artichoke. When you know that, you taste it, you're pouring yourself this weird brown, very soft liqueur, and you're like, yeah. That's definitely artichoke in a really weird way. You can taste it. And the other one that we went to is one that we very much love and didn't used to be available in the States until somewhat recently, like 4 years ago or something, Braulio. I used to bring this back from Italy whenever I'd go there. And it's from the Northern Alps, and it's
Super piney.
super piney. Yeah, that's the takeaway from Braulio. It's beautiful. You can sip it in a shot by itself, and it's lovely, and you're just like,
It also functions as a kind of cocktail bartender handshake. It's one of those things we sort of drink when you guys aren't looking at us.
But yeah, you're just like, you're drinking pine needles there. It's very much like super alpine, and it's from Bormio in the north of Italy. And so we started messing around with different, and those were the two that stood out where we were like, this is going somewhere now. And so once we came up with that, we were like, now let's see how it lightens up with just the addition of, Prosecco or this and that. And we really were like, this is just wants to be a highball, meaning with soda water. And so that became our go-to. And, it sounds like we're kind of slumming there. We're like, okay, so you threw together like a faux boulevardier and added soda water to it. But every single thing that you meant, like, I repeat this all the time, like, I can't emphasize how much time we waste on this. Like, it's like we use an ounce of this and 3/4 of an ounce of each of these. But to come upon that, we started with 2 and then 1.5 and then a half of this and then a half of let's go to a half of that. Let's go to 3/4 of that. No, that's wrong because that's sticking out now. Now the soda's too much. It's like you can do that for 3 days straight until you just find the absolute balance. And it's just like when you've hit it, you're like, well, duh. I mean, this was nothing. How did it like? That's the job actually. So I'm going to make. First of all, while I'm making, or sort of before I make one of those, I'll point out to you one of the things like how simple a drink is, and yet how complicated what we do is in a certain sense. Every bartender that you know, when you order a highball, is going to be like, okay. A highball is simply whiskey with soda water in it, on the rocks, generally with nothing for a garnish. That's an actual highball. But nowadays, all the cool kids are playing with highballs, so there'll be, a little bit of yuzu in it, or a little bergamot, or this and that. And this is how they start, and some rosemary, right? This is how they start. Here's how you start, right? You start there, and you put the whiskey, and then you put the soda in. This makes me crazy. And so many people I know who are professionals do this over and over and over. They don't understand, including the professionals standing next to me, including my bartenders who work for me, who I'm constantly screaming at about this. You all are, in the architecture world, you might understand the concept of displacement, meaning there's only so much that can go into a vessel. Everything has to have its spec, and there's a spec on each of these, and there's a spec on this. Now you've just filled this glass with ice. So now you put 2.5 ounces of respective spirits in there, and it's now coming up to there. So now how do you put 5 ounces of soda in there? That's what your bartender is going to do. And now you have a highball that doesn't work because you can't taste any sparkling liquid in there. That's how you make a highball. Ice, as it happens, I'm a huge fan of ice and dilution. This is the gospel I preach all the time. Dilution, dilution, dilution. But dilution brings out the flavors of things because it volatilizes different aromas in these very dense spirits, especially ones that are very high ABV or alcohol by volume like that. You want to dilute things down so that the aromatics are released.
I'm just going to point out that this is one of the only cases in which there's a tension between making a drink cold and making it properly diluted. I sometimes like it to be cold. Anyway, enjoy it, everybody.
Yeah, we go through this all the time. You know from being in Europe where they give you one small ice cube that you can chill things down with a very small volume of ice, actually. And we don't need to worry about dilution here. So I don't need a lot of ice. Here's our dilution. I just need things to be cold, and that is plenty of ice to make things cold. So now I have enough room in the glass to get everything I need in there properly, and I mean the soda water by that. So I'm going to, this is a super easy drink to construct. I'm building in glass, as we say. I'm not putting in a shaker. I'm not putting in a mixing glass. I'm building this in the glass because it's super, super simple. You just put the ingredients in, give it a stir, give it a whirl, and I'm going to give it a garnish of a zest of orange at the end. So that was 3/4 of an ounce of the Braulio. I'm going to append that with 3/4 of an ounce in each of these of Cynar. These two are both sort of similarly caramel-colored spirits. So we're going to get kind of a brownish drink for spring, kind of like the spring we've had. And to that, I'm going to add only 1 ounce of whiskey, and this is a rye made by our friend Alan Katz over at New York Distilling. It's called Jaywalk Bonded. Bonded means that it means a few different things in whiskey, but for our purposes, the only thing you really need to take away is bonded means that it's 100 proof or 50% alcohol. So that's a pretty gutsy whiskey. And being a rye, it's going to be kind of spicy. And so that spice and that dryness works against the sort of sweetness and caramel of the two Amari here that have their own sugar. Cold soda is going to go in there. And generally, I put the spirits at the bottom because alcohol will naturally come up to the top of a drink because it is lighter than water. But I'll give it a little stir anyway because you want things to be well mixed. To this, I'm going to chunk in 2 huge zests of orange, and I express them on top to get the orange oil, the citrus oil, to sort of fan out on the surface, and then I drop it on the table. It's a super simple drink. It's not a super simple tasting drink. That's the long and short of it. You all will have one of those in your hands within 15 minutes. Thanks very much.
Happy Friday, everybody. My name is Austin. I am a little bitter. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Thank you to the AIA New York Architecture Dialogue Committee for organizing this event and for inviting FXCollaborative to participate. Thank you, Toby and David, for this delicious cocktail, and thank you for all of you for spending your Friday here with me and Anna. We're very excited. I'm just going to get into it. For those of you who aren't familiar with FXCollaborative, we're a downtown Brooklyn-based practice engaged in everything from transportation to urban design to commercial offices and housing to schools and interior design and museums. And among all that work, what I'd like to talk to you about today is a topic that everyone seems to be talking about these days, which is adaptive reuse. I'm told that the title of this talk is Historic Reinvention. That's fine, too. Essentially, deciding to repurpose an old building with programs it wasn't meant for, rather than demolishing and building something new. And in so doing, contending with the different economic and social and cultural values embedded in that building. We're going to get into all of that. But first, a complaint. I'm a little bitter. Everyone's talking about adaptive reuse right now, right? It's just in the ether. And almost a little too neatly, adaptive reuse as a topic has become a vessel for our focus on carbon and circularity, our spiking alarm about the climate crisis and the housing crisis, our frustrations with zoning and building code, our disillusion with and casual use of words like neoliberalism and hypercapitalism, our NIMBYisms, and yes, our YIMBYisms, our anxieties about societal changes, our debates over values. When we talk about adaptive reuse, we're never just talking about adaptive reuse. And yet, when we talk about adaptive reuse, and when I say we, I mean we architects, we usually fall into two reductive tendencies. The first tendency is to talk about our projects as interventions. Look at these terrible existing conditions, and voila, here's my intervention. Everyone uses this word. I'm sure I've used it today in the office. And the second tendency is to talk about everything needing preservation. Here's a random vinyl box that was once a prime example of Gothic revival, and it's a townhouse, so let's save it. And full confession, as Stephen said, I happen to sit on the Jersey City Historic Preservation Commission, and so believe me when I say I also do that. But here's my complaint, that both the interventionist and preservationist rhetoric overvalorizes what we as architects do. Either everything is a problem waiting to be solved, or everything's a treasure waiting to be saved. And either way, don't worry, we're here to save the day. You're welcome. To me, this feels dumb. It feels patronizing and tone-deaf and more than a little problematic. To me, the city awaits neither intervention nor preservation, because to me, the city is a conversation. To me, every block and building and column is some form of argument, some form of rebuttal. Every room is in some way a response to every other room in the city. The poet Muriel Rukeyser writes, the universe is made of stories, not of atoms. So this idea that the city is an ongoing, this ever-expanding conversation. Now, when you join a conversation, at the next cocktail party that you're at with a cocktail party that you're at with a cocktail in your hand, you don't introduce yourself to a group by saying, I'm here with an intervention because this conversation sucks. Imagine the arrogance. Nor are you there to just record what everyone else says, right? Imagine how creepy. Rather, you listen, you engage, you argue and you agree, and you debate and you commiserate. You acknowledge that the conversation started before you got there, and that it will keep going after you leave. You're not there to save the conversation. You're just there to help shape it while you're there. The etymological root of the word conversation means to bend, to turn. You help bend the conversation, and in turn, you yourself bend to it. This is how cities work. We bend. So this is how I'd like to frame what I want to share with you today, as varying forms of conversation, as different ways that architecture can bend. So take, for example, our work on this 1925 building on Fifth Avenue, originally the Grosvenor Hotel, located in a landmark district. It was a hotel for 40 years, an NYU res hall for another 60 after that, and now hopefully for a lot longer because of this major renovation that we just completed. And I have to say, this is not a project that fits neatly into our usual definitions of design interventions. Now, I can show you concept diagrams. I can show you diagrams that tell you about the partie that organize the interiors and the finishes, but to be honest, that's just not the point of this project. And neither is this a preservation project. I could talk about the new 4/2 simulated double-hung windows that got through LPC. I could point out the various historic interior details that we showcase, but again, it's just not what this is about. So what's it about? I'd like to propose that this project is about maintenance. It's about maintenance. And here I think it's useful to remember Muriel Lederman-Ukeles, an artist who in 1969 published this amazing document, a manifesto for maintenance art. And in this manifesto, Ukeles distinguishes between the death instinct and the life instinct. The death instinct, she says, is about separation, individuality, the avant-garde par excellence, pure individual creation and change and excitement to follow one's own path to death. The life instinct, on the other hand, is about unification, the perpetuation and maintenance of the species, keeping the dust off, protecting progress, renewal, equilibrium. It's important to note that as she writes this manifesto, Euclid is a new mother and a wife, and she wants to make art, but she finds herself spending all her energy and time on washing and cleaning and wiping and cooking. And at a certain point, she just says, why isn't that art? And I quote, "Maintenance is a drag. It takes all the fucking time. The culture confers lousy status on maintenance jobs equals minimum wages, housewives equals no pay, and she's had it. And she declares, everything I say is art is art. Everything I say is art is art. So I say, everything we say is design is design. This is design. It's not design in the mode of avant-garde par excellence, of individual creation and change. Rather, it's design in the mode of maintenance, of labor, of support. It takes time. It's not the singular heroic gesture, but it's design. This is not a new idea. See, for example, Hilary Sample's beautiful book on the maintenance of architecture. And from this, I would simply extrapolate the possibility of an architecture of maintenance, because that's what this project is. So those windows that I mentioned earlier, the design was not about the 4/2s or the historic trim. It was about creating these massive, cutting-edge, triple pane, tilt-turn, passive house windows. Windows that helped this project make it the largest passive house retrofit project in the world. Windows that set a new bar for New York institutions navigating Local Law 97. The design here is about the super high performance envelope, the infrastructure, the air source heat pumps, the rooftop DOAS units. The design here is about the blower door test. The design is about taking a drafty pre-war building that used to have steam radiators and making it fully electric, taking something 100 years old and giving it another 100 years, not because it's special, but simply because it's needed. And what this building needed, what this project needed, was design not as intervention, not as preservation, but design as an act of maintenance. That is, if we can just bend the definition of design to include the labor of care and the upkeep and sustenance. Because everything we say is design is design. And the result is that for NYU, these are now the quietest, healthiest, most comfortable, and most decarbonized dorm rooms on campus, because of a design approach that embraced the ordinary work of sustaining an ordinary building at an extraordinary level. Now, part of this argument that I'm making about Rubin Hall is, of course, tied to the fact that it is very much a fabric building. It is an ordinary building. This is the original inscription on its historic facade, Virtus non stemma, virtue not pedigree. I mean, it's almost a manifesto. But sometimes we do have a project that engages, let's say, a more significant, let's say, a more pedigreed work of architecture, as is the case here, where we are transforming the first Church of Christ Scientist in 1903 structure by Carrere and Hastings on Central Park West. And we're transforming it into the new home for the Children's Museum of Manhattan. And of course, you'll remember Carrere and Hastings as the architects of the Frick Collection and the New York Public Library. This is an instance when confronting an historically significant work of architecture, a canonic work of architecture, also means confronting all the cultural and societal values of the time that it was built in, values which are somehow physically embedded in the building, which leads us to ask, what happens if the societal norms and values of 1903 don't exactly align with our own in 2025? How should we engage the canon when they start to feel out of touch? All these great works by great men, all mostly dead white men. Most of us acknowledge the importance of the so-called classics, whether it's architecture or art or literature, but most of us will also acknowledge that the very idea of there being a canon may be the very thing that's preventing us from imagining a better world. I think there's an alternate way to think about canon, not in terms of orthodoxy or pedagogy, but rather in terms of music. In music, a canon is something completely different. It's a song form where you start with a melody, and after a delay, you start it again and you create an overlap. So think row, row, row your boat, Pachelbel and D, right? In a musical canon, that delay, that gap in time is the point. And you almost never simply repeat the melody, you augment it or you diminish it, you mirror it. You spiral it into different keys, you mutate it, and you cut it up, and you reassemble it. What makes the composition rich is never the original melody alone, it's the distance and tension between what came first and what comes after, like a conversation. That's the frame through which I'd like to talk about the Children's Museum as a performance of a canon, as if the original church and its embedded cultural and social values were only the first melodic line that we build on, pull from, echo, and counterpoint to make a richer composition, to turn a space for praying into a place for playing. There are harmonic tensions. 100 years ago, maybe climbing these stone steps, maybe the weight of these huge wood doors that you had to pull on, maybe that might have inspired a sense of separation from the secular world, but we live in a world that needs to be more accessible, more open, and more connected. So the simple act of lowering the threshold, of being able to see inside through the glass, lowering the floor beyond it, of keeping those wood doors not as something to push past, but rather as wall-mounted relics to pass by, this becomes a kind of quiet but insistent counterpoint. There are echoes. Something unusual about the original building was that it placed community spaces above the nave rather than below. They were, in fact, the first church of New York to have an elevator. Cameron, did I get that right? I think that's right. Okay, I think that's right. And so up in that space above the nave, we have a flexible performance space up here, something that brings kids up to the highest level of the building, along with a publicly accessible roof terrace with these amazing vistas of Central Park perched atop the whole museum. There are deviations. The original church was very clear in how you were supposed to proceed and where you were supposed to look throughout this perfectly symmetrical monumental space. It wielded its higher authority. But kids don't care about that. They want to get around how they want to get around. They want to see what they want to see and how they want to. So now there is no prescribed route through the museum. You choose your own adventure with unexpected surprises and glimpses and oblique visual connections throughout. Now, we're performing a canon because, of course, Curran and Hastings were also performing a canon. They had their own antecedents, like, for example, Nicholas Hawksmoor's deeply weird Christ Church. And I say deeply weird because, of course, Hawksmoor had his own canon, which included the Gothic. And I think there is no clearer voice in articulating the spirit of the Gothic than John Ruskin, who best summarizes what it means to perform a canon with a great work across time to bend with those who came before you and those who will come after. So I'm quoting now from the Stones of Venice, quote, "Undefined in its slope of roof, height of shaft, breadth of arch, or disposition of ground plan, it can shrink into a turret, expand into a hall, coil into a staircase, or spring into a spire with undegraded grace and unexhausted energy. And whenever it finds occasion for change in its form or purpose, it submits to it without the slightest sense of loss, either to its unity or majesty, subtle and flexible like a fiery serpent, but ever attentive to the voice of the charmer." And it is one of the chief virtues of the Gothic builders that they never suffered ideas of outside symmetries and consistencies to interfere with the real use and value of what they did. If they wanted a window, they opened one. A room, they added one. A buttress, they built one. Utterly regardless of any established conventionalities of external appearance, knowing, as indeed it always happened, that such daring interruptions of the formal plan would rather give additional interest to its symmetry than to injure it. So that in the best of times of Gothic, a useless window would rather have been opened in an unexpected place for the sake of the surprise than a useful one forbidden for the sake of symmetry. Every successive architect employed upon a great work built the pieces he added in his own way, utterly regardless of the style adopted by his predecessors. And if the two towers were raised in nominal correspondence at the sides of a cathedral front, one was nearly sure to be different from the other. And in each, the style at the top to be different from the style at the bottom, unquote. And finally, since we started with the universe of stories, I'd like to end there too with an idea of architecture as a mode of and a vehicle for storytelling. In Act 5 of A Midsummer Night's Dream, there's this moment when Theseus doubts all these crazy things that's happened the night before. And he says, it couldn't have been real. It's all been made up. And Hippolyta says, no. And again, quote, "But all the story of the night told over, and all their minds transfigured so together, more witnesseth than fancy's images, and grows to something of great constancy, but howsoever strange and admirable. Hippolyta is asking Theseus to suspend his disbelief, and of course she is also asking us, the audience in the theater, to suspend ours. She invokes the power of theater, of storytelling within a community, to transform mere images into a strange but enduring reality. I think this is a useful reminder for us architects. When we think, I think maybe, we think that we build in the real world and sometimes we get to tell stories in it. And Hippolyta says no, it's actually the opposite. It's the stories that we tell that make the world real, and sometimes we get to build in it. The universe is made of stories, not of atoms. This is Pace University's main building at their Manhattan campus, and it was built in 1969, and it tells a story. It tells a story about the city in 1969, a story about massive social unrest, about cultural change, about a city in upheaval. So it's easy now to point at this and say, oh God, more ugly brutalism. But it looks like a fortress because it was. It was designed to protect students from the chaos outside. So is this ugly? Maybe. I think so sometimes. But to go back to Hippolyta, I also find it strange and admirable because it's a kind of concretization of a certain story of a certain moment. But that story of the city then is not the story of the city now, and so we've been working for many years, we at FXCollaborative have been working for many years now with and within this building to enable new stories. A few years ago, we finished a major renovation on the west half of the building where we swept through the interior with a series of new student spaces and study spaces, spaces that began to soften and yes, bend the building's rigidity, that opened things up from inside, both horizontally and vertically, that pushed out past the building's own shell to connect to the city outside. And then, more recently, after all this work was done, we were invited back to work on the other half of the same building and to turn it into the new home for the Sands School of Performing Arts. And so we're taking this mid-century classroom building and we're turning it into a dense hub of multiple black box theaters, of sound stages, of light labs, rehearsal studios, scene shops, recording studios, and a new proscenium theater. And as much as we are overlaying new programs and spaces into this thing, as much as we'd like to think that we're telling this building how things will be, the building is talking back. The building is talkative. It gives us clues on how to proportion our new black box theaters within its structural grid, and it suggests opportunities to present theater in new ways that connect inside and outside. The building is stubborn. We politely point out that this, see it at the top there, this 10-foot deep, 90-foot span steel double girder is making it really hard to squeeze a theater under it, but it refuses to negotiate. So we bend. The building is generous. It gives us columns that we can cut and reuse as cords in a new truss that spans a new 70-foot high stage house, a volume that we are creating by blowing out floor after floor after floor within this mid-century shell. These are material transformations of reality, of steel and stone and concrete, that are happening around the stories to be told over here, for minds to be transfigured so together here, growing to something of great constancy, but howsoever strange and admirable. Here's another example of architecture as storytelling, the David Rockefeller Creative Arts Center. This is a century-old building, originally an orangery with a dirt floor on the Rockefeller estate up in Tarrytown. And today it's a flexible performing arts facility, an education center, an art gallery, a workspace for an artist in residence. A landscape that used to be scenography 100 years ago is now sustainable infrastructure with PVs and rain gardens. Boundaries that used to be fixed can now open out. Spaces that used to be single purpose are now flexible and full of possibilities. And again, these are material transformations around stories. A dirt floor becomes a concrete slab. A wood beam gets reinforced with steel and becomes a bow truss. A column gets cut. Stories transfiguring minds and growing into reality.
maybe my favorite piece of writing that speaks to the cycles of past and future, of what remains of a place, in a place, of what can and can't reach across time, is a poem by Wallace Stevens. I beg your indulgence. This is called Postcard from a Volcano. Children picking up our bones will never know that these were once as quick as foxes on the hill, and that in autumn, when the grapes made sharp air sharper by their smell, these had a being, breathing frost. And least we'll guess that with our bones, we left much more, left what still is the look of things, left what we felt at what we saw. The spring clouds blow above the shuttered mansion house beyond our gate, and the windy sky cries out a literate despair. We knew for long the mansion's look, and what we said of it became a part of what it is. Children still weaving budded orioles will speak our speech and never know. We'll say of the mansion that it seems as if he that lived there left behind a spirit storming in blank walls. A dirty house in a gutted world, a tatter of shadows peaked to white, smeared with the gold of the opulent sun. I'll conclude with this last slide, and I show it because it's what we're working on now. This is the Kingsbridge Armory. This is the world's largest armory. The drill hall alone is a 4.2-acre column-free space. And of course, armories tell stories too about military power and authority and control. And layered onto those stories, we're bringing a few more. A story that includes new affordable housing and live music and events, community uses, arts and culture, and youth recreation and sports, and even light manufacturing. It's a conversation that we've only just joined, which is why I'm not allowed to share more images with you today. But of course, it's a conversation that started long before we got here and surely will continue long after we do our part. But as with every other project that I showed today, it's a conversation that we're very proud to be a part of and help shape. Thank you.
Cheers.
I was like, I can't finish this drink before I ask you a couple of questions, which is why it's only a little bit. Thank you. That was so fascinating. There's a lot to unpack. I mean, going back to the beginning of your talk, you mentioned how you don't like the word intervention. And can you say a little bit more about that? How do you avoid being an interventionist in your work? And then also, has there been moments where the designer was acting as an interventionist and that really failed the public?
So I went to Cooper. I had professors who sort of spoke about the violence of the act of interrupting the horizon, and the need to embrace that fundamentally violent act. And it was a bracing kind of position, and it really has stayed with me. I think the problem is that those violent undertones sometimes seem gratuitous, sometimes seems just piling on, because what we do involves the marshaling of so many resources, right? So much labor and so much money, that of course it's an intervention, right? There's a part of that, but I think that the discourse around that is also changing, and I think it's fascinating. Justin Moore, wrote a brilliant piece about proposing the Department of Care, right, for New York City. I think thinking about architecture not only for that heroic gestural moment, but actually as this ongoing 1,000 acts a day of small works of maintenance and care and sustenance seems to be as valid a position, as important a position, actually maybe the harder position, and I would say the more radical position. I would say that
to start to reject the interventionist rhetoric is maybe the most radical thing we could do. When has it failed? I feel like, all the failures of the built environment are a testament to, this notion that architects get to just drop their thing, they do their thing, drop the mic, and walk away, right? And everyone else is sort of left holding the bag. So I guess I'm trying to find inspiration from artists like one that I showed, who, by the way, I should credit. These ideas that I'm talking about today, these are not my ideas. These are ideas that came out of many conversations within the studio. That particular artist, a woman named Lizzie Himmel, brought that artist to the conversation. So that's the other thing. It's like sort of rejecting the notion of like the sole voice of things, right? But rather pulling inspiration and credit and ideas from across the studio. So sorry, that's too long of an answer.
No, it's okay. Where did, maybe you don't have the answer to this, but where did this idea of the architect as a savior even come from? Like where does that go back to?
Oh God. I don't know. Does anyone know? It's real though, right? I think we're asked to do a lot. Yeah. I think architecture is incredibly difficult. So maybe it's natural to want to see ourselves in that way. We are asked to take dissimilar sets of information, dissimilar sets of input, economic things, somebody's aesthetic habits and preferences, site conditions, none of which are talking to each other except through, the work of architecture that somehow has to synthesize all these things. So I don't know. Maybe it feels natural to think that, but I don't know. It feels hopelessly old-fashioned at this point.
So much of your work, so many of these projects involve balancing preserving original character with also updating for modern needs. Have there been moments where those two things are conflicting?
Yeah, actually, and this is where I'd like to turn it back to you. Like the work that we've been doing at Pace University is like a really good example of a building that is, as I said, stubborn, right? It just has I see Victoria back there, she knows, she worked on this with me too. There's a quality to this kind of brutalist building that, it is what it is and it knows what it is. It has a certain kind of integrity and dignity, but it's also very tough, right? And so when you have 4-foot-high stone parapets that make sure that nobody inside can see anybody outside, when you have classrooms that have no access to natural light because it wasn't about the light, it was about making sure students aren't distracted by the chaos, quote unquote, chaos of the city outside. That's really tough to work with because it's like baked into the DNA of the building, and obviously it's had a lot of reactions. I mean, you've done a lot of research and you've written about the politicization of brutalism, and maybe I ask you, what's been your experience with this?
With brutalism, I am always caught between two ideas here. One, that this style is inherently political because of its history and its rise, but also how it can be used as a political tool almost. Saying you hate it or love it can evoke lots of controversial feelings, and you can probably guess where someone is on the political spectrum when they say something like that. But in the US, it's really associated with institutional power because of the era in which it came about, and it goes back to President Kennedy. He wanted new guidelines for design for federal buildings, right? And there was a lot of need for federal office space at the time. And then right after that, you have Johnson and the Great Society programs, and a lot of the buildings that house those programs, the HUD building, the DOE, are brutalist buildings. And now we're in a very different era, and people who tend to romanticize brutalism are also romanticizing the idea of the government as this benevolent presence in public life, but people who are vocal about hating brutalism, like our president and Tucker Carlson, are also attacking those programs in a way. So, you know, it can be both.
I think that's so interesting. In fact, the Pace building, you know, I talk about it as if it's been part of New York fabric forever, but actually it was a part of an urban renewal plan that swept away a huge swath of actual New York City, or you know, organic or actual New York City fabric, and it was part of a broader master plan that included federal buildings and hospitals and you know, examples of institutional power, institutional governance, and that building was like, okay, this will be the school. Right, but it was part, and so actually, if you look at that building in the broader, and if you sort of zoom out, which I didn't do, you can see the federal buildings just up the way that it was a part of, and you know, and by the way, in doing so, actually cleared away really important buildings by architects like Richard Morris Hunt. So yeah, that's a really great point.
And I think a lot of brutalism was architecture as intervention too, to bring it back to that earlier point. It was this idea post-war of we're starting totally new. We're building from scratch, new materials, new forms. And I guess right now this talk is supposed to be talking about adapting it to the present. So it's just a totally different idea. And another thing that came to mind while you were talking too was just to pull back even farther, like, we have to do a lot to maintain spaces, and maybe you can just speak to why we should go through that at all rather than building afresh.
It's like, sometimes it feels like it would be so much easier to just freaking demo it, right? And just like build it new, right? Like sometimes the difficulty of the real feels like it's in the way of the ease of the promise of the not yet real, right? And I feel like that kind of approach also is an approach that treats the built environment like calories, you know? Like things that we a little bit too easily consume, a little bit too easily shit out, right? Like, I feel like if we can slow that metabolism a little bit and just kind of give ourselves a little bit of the time and space to say, well, can this work? And if we choose to tackle the difficulty of this, the difficulty of fitting theaters in the structural grid of a classroom building, like, is there a reward for that? Is it more than just like patting ourselves on the back for, hey, we saved, you know, the embodied carbon, and hey, you know, somebody loves this building and we're still holding on to it. Like, I think the richness that that kind of approach provides is a richness that we can't just auto-generate when we're just doing the new thing, when we're just doing the new building by itself. Because it provides a kind of resistance, it provides a kind of, you know, it's talking back to us, right? I mean, architects, we rely on conversation, we rely on critiques, we rely on somebody telling us, actually, it's not a great idea, right? Like, that conversation back and forth is how our work gets better, and when we allow, I think, the built environment, as curmudgeonly and stubborn and talkative as it can be, I think there's great reward to that. So again, I know we're focusing on pace, but you know, that's an example where the grid of the building actually drove the proportions of these theaters and made them more interesting and more rich and actually more innovative than they would have been had we just started from scratch. You know, so you know, we have a theater that's sort of like, you know, tall but opens out to you know, to a courtyard, and you know, provides the opportunity to like present theater in new ways that we wouldn't have thought of if we were just doing a classic black box theater, right? The proscenium theater that we're designing has a fly that has like technical galleries at every level because we had to blow out holes at every level, you know, and that's not something. So you know, I think, I mean, those are just, you know, small examples, but I think embracing the real for all its difficulties. I think there's a danger of missing all that if we just skip it. Not to mention the implications around carbon, the implications around sustainability, resources, you know, all.
Yeah, and the idea that whatever we build today from scratch will be outdated very quickly, and we'll have to go through this same process very soon, sooner than expected probably. I want to talk about, with the Children's Museum, the decision to change the large wooden doors into something that you can look into and that look out of the glass doors. Just say more about that and how perhaps the wooden doors spoke to the era in which the church was originally built.
So there's this Finnish architect named Juhani Palasma, and he has this lovely quote I think about often.
I love Palasma.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Okay. How do you know Juhani Palasma? That's crazy.
Okay, because he talks about how architecture, it doesn't evoke the other senses enough, right?
right.
And
The eyes of the skin, right?
yes,
Yeah.
and there's one part of his book where he talks about licking buildings as a way
so
to
funny.
experience them
Yeah.
and occupy them differently,
Yeah.
and the idea that everything that you perceive about a building, you're actually even though you might not go around licking buildings, you know how a building tastes. You know how those walls taste by just looking at them. You know how I don't know, the Chrysler building tastes. You can just imagine it.
Well, so in the book, Eyes of the Skin, he has this quote that says, the door handle is the handshake of a building. And I think a door is not just this, thing that you have to open to get past. It has a weight, right? It has proportions that either tower over you or echo your proportions, right? It has, it has materiality. It has a surface that you have to touch, right? And I think so it's a handshake. So what's the handshake of a early 20th century church to a congregant, right? It's sort of the handshake of the priest, the handshake of authority, right? And kind of come on in. And I think it's just not the right handshake for a children's museum, right? So I think the act of lowering that threshold and lowering the floor, that a third of that floor beyond that door is lowered to make that an on-grade entrance, and making it open, and then as you walk in, being able to see the kind of layering of spaces. It's more than just a visibility, I guess. To your point about Palasma, it's all the senses. It's the strain in your thighs that you don't feel by having to climb steps, right? It's the lightness of the door that you push past rather than feeling like you have to, yeah.
Are there architectural elements you're seeing in spaces that were designed not that long ago, maybe in the last decade or 2 decades, that you feel like are already outdated or need to be modernized, or just maybe more broadly speak to the socio-political climate of the recent times, but that we're no longer in?
Yeah. Can I flip that back to you?
Okay, fine.
So can I couch that in a specific article? One of my favorite articles that you wrote, which is about the Barbie dream house.
Yeah.
Because if you haven't read this article, you need to go Google it immediately. It's tracing how the socio-political contexts of each era in American history gets articulated through the design of the Barbie dream house, right? So, and of course, the last iteration of the Barbie dream house has a work from home, pandemic era office and a wheelchair accessible elevator inside the house. So, I would love to hear sort of how you see our current moment. What's going to be the next Barbie dream house?
I think Barbie's gonna be a renter, and I think she might have roommates. No, but actually,
She doesn't live at home, with her parents?
or she moves back in with her parents. I mean, as a toy, it's always been about aspiration with Barbie, the ideal woman, the ideal career, the ideal home, and the dream house over the decades represented that. When it first came out as a toy in 1962, that was a time when most women could not get their own mortgage without a male cosigner, right? So it was already kind of ahead of its time. And I recently did a piece like a few months ago about how young people are viewing the American dream without home ownership. They're kind of reimagining it because it's become so inaccessible, but there's a lot of people who still want to stay in this country and have their vision of that. And so people I talk to in surveys and studies, they're talking about building an American dream more around a sense of community, dream careers, things like that, which is, you know, a looser vision than your home and your white picket fence. But that was also something that only came about in the 50s when American dream as a term was coined in 1931. It was supposed to be an amorphous thing. It was supposed to be this idea of this country is a place you can come to build a richer and fuller life. It did not have a home in it until the post-war economic boom.
Should we open it up to?
Find the microphone
And by the way, sorry, while the mic is being passed around, I'm
just before the questions, I wanted to thank you both for a brilliant presentation, a wonderful conversation. And when you mentioned the doors being sort of the handshake of the building, I'm sure you know this, but I couldn't help but think about the door handles that Gunnar Asplund did for the Stockholm Public Library, which were the naked forms of Adam and Eve, so that anyone who went into the library had a different kind of sensual experience before getting to the books. And I don't want to end with saying, and lick that, but.
While the mics, or while we're, if somebody wants to ask a question, I just want to make one quick note. You know, I'm here representing a studio and projects that I didn't necessarily work on myself, right? There's a bunch of people here who have poured years and, you know, and just an extraordinary amount of labor and love into these projects, and I just want to make sure that it's understood that, you know, this is the work of many, and I'm just kind of the ambassador to these ideas. But so, that's weird. Don't clap for that. That's weird. All right, so questions?
Thank you so much for coming out and speaking. I'm sorry if this is like a vulgar question, but when you look at the church, the first church, Christian, the children's church, is the lowering of the steps maybe not a response just to the legal issues regarding ADA, as in the pictures that you showed above, there's a ramp coming back up. So when we think about architecture not being imposing or not coming into a space and telling its own story besides whatever the story of its time is, how much do you say that is the past, and how much do you say that is the present in terms of lowering the steps and bringing that vision to the people on the street?
Are you asking how much of it we would have had to do anyway?
In a sense, yes, but in a sense, if you were an architect without the constraints of the ADA.
So you know, there's any number of ways to solve that issue from the point of view of accommodation. That would have involved less structural work, that would have involved less convincing the LPC, right? That would have solved the literal legal part. I think the you know, the what I'm proud of that design, which is not my design, is that it takes the approach kind of beyond the legal to an ethical, and I think that that is you know, it's a design of principle that I think goes beyond what we would have had to do anyway, just to comply with ADA. The sidewalk slopes, you know, there's multiple entrances. There would have been opportunities other than the ones that I showed that would have solved that differently, more easily, but that would have treated this more as a code issue. But I don't think that's the approach we wanted to take.
Hi, I first want to say thank you for the presentation. I'm not an architect by training, but this was amazing to listen to from a former faculty of mine.
Hi, Megan.
I more have a question about adaptive reuse in terms of children. Buildings are designed for the average height and needs of an adult human. And when you're redesigning for a child, and to make it easier for them, they would have a different requirement. How do you go about potentially changing the structure of that building to accommodate different window heights, door heights, even the door handle, which you mentioned, which would be at a different height for a smaller human?
Is Cameron still here? She's like, so she's the designer of that project, and you should see her Miro board. It's insane, of just thousands of sketches of nooks and crannies and windows at that high, and drawing the kids in, and really sort of embodying sort of what it is to be different sizes and different people. So there are, you may or may not have noticed throughout the renderings, there are these like strange windows that occur at strange heights, but they're only strange because we're adults, and would be entirely natural if you're a kid. That privileges the kind of child's views that cuts across those spaces in a way that might not be noticeable for the adult passerby. So I think that's sort of like one part of it. I think, and this goes a little bit beyond adaptive reuse, but like, there's so many layers to like how we think about designing for kids. For example, sorry, this is gonna seem like a real tangent, but carpets. Like the toxin sink that carpets are, because they just absorb all the crap in the air and all the toxins in the air over time that never gets replaced. They don't actually hurt most of us, but they really are harmful for children because they're just lower to the floor, right? So like, how we design around and with healthy materials, knowing about the lower couple feet, that's just the air, the actual measurable air quality being different from, like, that's another example of like material choices that we can make, finish choices that we can make. So I think it's a huge question. It's a wonderful question that that we should all sort of be better at thinking through. I don't know. You want to add to that or anything?
I can't add to that from a design perspective, but that was really interesting. I mean, I've always hated carpet, but that adds an extra layer of being more thoughtful about these things, and also just thinking about all different age groups when it comes to design, and everything from the actual, like going all the way to the finishes, like you just said.
Any other questions? Over there.
Hello. I think wonderful presentation and wonderful cocktail. I think. Yes. Cheers to that. I'm not sure it's kind of a question or it's just a thought or just a conversation. I loved your premise of architecture being more interactive, and each and every spaces are interactive, that it generates some kind of conversation. I wanted to know your thoughts in terms of the general idea of your presentation of adaptive reuse, in the sense that there are two kinds of spaces, let's say the container, let's say the urban fabric of the building, and the contained, which is the interior of the space. While the adaptive reuse, we keep the container as it is, or we just modify the container, but while we entirely change the contained into it, having a different program into the contained, how do you think that that entire thing interacts with you? Because when you're outside the container, it completely interacts with you in a different way. And while you have done the adaptive reuse of the space, while you go inside the container, the materials are different than the exterior, the space program, the planning have changed. The proportions are the same, but the space is used in a different way. How the interaction completely changes when you're within, when you're contained, and the interaction is very different. I just want to know your thoughts on how do you go about it.
I think it's not the kind of diagram that you're describing is a beautiful diagram, but at least in my experience, things are just a lot more entangled than that. Literally, from a kind of building systems point of view, structural point of view, access point of view, like, you know, in what you just described, you know, imagining a space that resides within a contained piece that is also then contained by a container, you know, when you said that, I thought, oh, well, that's a level change, and where are you going to put the ramp? You know, like, there are just kind of like very practical things that come out of that. But more broadly, I think that what you're describing is also beautiful as it is a kind of self-isolating vision, right? It's a way to establish yet another silo, yet another way to disengage from things at the risk of messing it up, at the risk of like saying the wrong thing. As you can tell, I often say the wrong thing, but I do it because I'm interested in engaging a conversation, not disengaging from it. I'm interested in spaces that engage the container, not pull away from it. And I think that's the approach that we have to take within buildings, literally. I think it's the approach that we need to take, you know, like to our planet. Like, we need to be a lot more engaged, a lot more entangled with what we're doing, you know, at a kind of planetary level. And we just need to be a lot more in each other's faces. We just need to be a lot more willing to like talk to each other and kind of piss each other off sometimes and reinforce each other. And I think if we don't, we go right back to the 20th century diagram of like clean, modern, abstract shapes floating in a clean, modern void that actually doesn't exist while the planet burns. Sorry, that seems overly broad, but like I'm just kind of reacting to the idea.
Can I ask Austin one more question? Yeah. So when I walked in, I was jokingly like, I'm going to ask you about Trump, but I think I'm actually going to ask you about Trump. What was your reaction to the executive memorandum promoting beautiful federal architecture, you know, pushing for classical designs within federal buildings? And how do you feel as someone in the field being told what is beautiful by the government?
I'm trying to think of a way to answer that isn't obvious and predictable and cliched.
I mean, be
but
honest.
But of course, like one throws up in one's mouth a little. You know, like it's really extraordinary. Are you recording this, Mel? It's really extraordinary because it's so predictable. It's so entrenched. You know, the reversion back to like this is not the first time, and you know, just gonna say it. See, I'm going to say the wrong thing. It's not the first time that, like, you know, fascists want to revert to a classical language of architecture and aesthetics, right? It's not the first time that, you know, that you know, beautiful works of history and architecture are what's the word? Not, they're, you know, they're taken over and they get turned into tools for a political regime, right? Like it, and it's incredibly, it makes me distraught, right? At the same time, I feel like when we respond to that, we also respond in this incredibly predictable, incredibly kind of dumb way, which is like to make this conversation about style, right? As if style is the thing that's wrong, right? You know, like many of us in this room will be like, no, well, we live in the modern times and therefore we must design modern. You know, it's like, it's not about style, right? It's about authoritarianism, right? It's about being told what to say is beautiful and not. It's not about whether or not a building should have a pitched roof or a flat one, or whether or not a column should have Corinthian capitals, or none at all. So to me, this is a sort of aesthetic style. This is a basic fundamental freedom issue disguised as a style argument. You know, it's, I don't know. It just goes to, I think, a deeper, much more troubling thing. You know, I think there are amazing buildings being designed within a classical language that isn't an example of a fascist regime, right? I think there are great, really important architects who reject the style of, you know, modernism and who do amazing work. My beef is not with them, if that makes sense.
Definitely. Thank you for answering that tough question.
Back there.
I just really loved what you said at the start about thinking about maintenance as art, and I was wondering if you could just maybe talk a little bit more about that. Are there other individuals who are kind of working to establish this as a paradigm, or how has that idea sort of been received? Anything that you'd want to say along those lines?
Yeah, you know, the great irony here is that it's a concept that I'm completely obsessed with in the practice that I do. But my wife is here, and she knows how bad I am at maintaining my house at home, right? Like every light bulb that goes out, it takes like 6 months for, you know, so. So, you know, I'm a little bit conscious of, like, you know, practicing and preaching and all that. But I wanted to bring it to the table today because, and again, maybe this is just like about what we do every day. There's like so much that we do in the office every day that doesn't fit into the discourse of architectural design, right? Like it doesn't, like there's so much that, you know, all the ULURP studies, right? The pre-design stuff, the, you know, all the programming. So there's like so much that actually comprises the design brain and the design mind, but that doesn't get into the magazines and the museums, right? And what I love about that maintenance manifesto is that it sort of rejects those boundaries, and it says, you know what, I'm doing this thing here. I'm cooking and cleaning, I'm wiping, and, you know, like, God damn it, this is art. Everything I say is art is art. So, like, you know, it's an attitude that I think honors what we do every day in the office. That, you know, not everything that we do is the beautiful sketch, right? But still, so important, so necessary. Like, without that labor, what use would the beautiful sketch be, right? So that's why I wanted to bring it here today, is to kind of make space to start to shift what we mean when we say design, to start to shift what we mean when we say beautiful or radical. I think the way we think about these things is just too narrow. It's too it feels old hat to me, and I think it misses a lot of richness. It misses a lot of design, and it misses a lot of really great work. Does that get anywhere close to answering your question?
Well, I think we have maybe one more question, and then we'll need to close up. One question there?
Yes, thanks, Austin. Thanks, Anna. Great talk. Probably a less philosophical question, but I was just curious, what's your secret sauce for navigating the LPC and community boards, especially when you say you're going to get the career in Hastings?
The secret sauce? I don't know that there's a secret. Does anyone have a secret sauce? So for the Kingsbridge Armory that we're working on now, we are talking to the council member, the Bronx Borough President, PDC, LPC, SHPO, EDC, DOT, MTA. Did I say PDC already? It's like a freaking soup. And I have to say, what's been really amazing is that when you have a vision that everyone can agree will be great for the community and for all the people who live around there, like when it's just like whether it's about historic fabric or height or materials, whatever, when there's just like a vision that people can kind of rally around and find consensus around, everyone starts rooting for you. That's what's been really great about this project, is like everyone's rooting for us. Everyone wants this project to succeed. And so when we're talking to LPC, I shouldn't say this in a public setting, I'm gonna say it, I'm saying the wrong thing. LPC was like, hey, look, SHPO may not agree with us, but like if you have to make the housing a little higher, just to like do the right thing, like it's fine. Armory's huge, it can take it. Like they just kind of like throw the, they help. So I don't know. I don't think that's a secret sauce, but at least that's been our approach in a number of our projects, is to be clear about the vision, about the respect that we give to the history that we are engaging with, be honest, be vulnerable, and yeah, I don't know. It's been a wonderful series of conversations with the Landmarks folks. I guess I'm saying that also because, again, I'm from Jersey City. I sit on the Historic Preservation Commission of Jersey City, and like I like it when applicants come to us with a vision as opposed to here's my set of drawings and here's the sightline diagram and look, So I guess that's part of it too.
I want to, Austin, Anna, Toby, David, Salmata, Eve, I want to thank you so much for tonight's enlightening, inquisitive, and delicious evening of discussion and drink. So thank you so much.